The autumn afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Morrison's pawn shop as 37-year-old Thomas Chen stood behind the counter, carefully examining a violin that had been brought in by one of his regular customers. The instrument was clearly old and well-loved, its wood bearing the patina of countless hours of practice and performance. Thomas had owned the small pawn shop for 8 years. Ever since he lost his job as a music teacher and needed a way to support his 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, the shop was located in a working-class neighborhood where people often had to make difficult choices between sentiment and survival. And Thomas had learned to handle these transactions with dignity and respect. The man who had brought in the violin was Roberto Martinez, a 42-year-old janitor at the corporate headquarters downtown. Roberto's weathered hands and tired eyes told the story of someone who worked long hours for modest pay, but he carried himself with quiet dignity despite his circumstances. "I know it's not worth much," Roberto said quietly, running his fingers along the violin case one last time. "But my daughter needs new school shoes, and this is all I have left to sell." Thomas opened the case and immediately recognized that this was no ordinary instrument. The violin was a 19th century piece, possibly German-made, with intricate inlay work and a sound post that suggested it had been crafted by a master luthier. More than its monetary value, Thomas could see the care with which it had been maintained and the love that had gone into preserving it. "How long have you had this?" Thomas asked gently. "It was my father's," Roberto replied. "He played in a mariachi band when I was young. He taught me to play when I was Sophie's age, but life got complicated, and I haven't touched it in years." Thomas could hear the pain in Roberto's voice, the weight of a man having to sell something that connected him to his father and his musical heritage. But he also understood the immediate need that drove such decisions. "I can give you $200 for it," Thomas said, knowing the violin was worth at least 3 times that amount. "But I want you to know that if you can come back within 30 days, I'll sell it back to you for the same price." Roberto's eyes showed both gratitude and resignation. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. You're more generous than most. But honestly, if I had $200 in 30 days, I wouldn't need to sell it now." The transaction was completed with the quiet professionalism that Thomas brought to all his dealings. But as Roberto left the shop, Thomas felt the familiar ache that came with witnessing someone's forced separation from something precious. Later that afternoon, the shop's atmosphere changed dramatically when Alexander Blackwell entered with the commanding presence of someone accustomed to having problems solved immediately. At 45, Alexander was the CEO of Blackwell Industries, a manufacturing conglomerate worth over $500 million. His expensive suit and impatient demeanor marked him as someone who viewed time as money and efficiency as virtue. Alexander had come to the pawn shop on the recommendation of his personal assistant, who had mentioned that Morrison's occasionally had interesting vintage items. He was looking for a unique gift for his 12-year-old daughter, Emma, who had recently started violin lessons at her exclusive private school. "I need to see your musical instruments," Alexander said briskly, barely acknowledging Thomas with more than a glance. Thomas led him to the section where Roberto's violin was displayed. Alexander's eyes immediately fixed on the instrument, recognizing its quality despite his limited musical knowledge. "This one," Alexander said, pointing to the violin. "How much?" $600, Thomas replied, having marked it up appropriately for retail sale. Alexander pulled out his wallet without hesitation. "Fine. I assume it's in good working condition?" "It's a beautiful instrument," Thomas said. "Well-maintained and clearly loved by its previous owner?" "Previous owner?" Alexander asked with a dismissive tone. "Let me guess, some struggling musician who couldn't make rent?" Thomas felt his jaw tighten at the casual cruelty in Alexander's assumption, but he maintained his professional composure. "Actually, it belonged to a hard-working father who needed to buy school shoes for his daughter." "Ah, even better," Alexander said with a cold laugh. "At least it's going from someone who couldn't appreciate its value to someone who can actually afford to maintain it properly." Thomas completed the sale with growing discomfort, watching Alexander treat the violin like any other commodity rather than the repository of memories and dreams it actually was. 3 weeks later, Thomas was surprised to see Alexander return to the shop, but this time he wasn't alone. With him was his daughter Emma, a serious-looking 12-year-old with long brown hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. "There's been a problem with the violin," Alexander said tersely. "My daughter says there's something wrong with it and I want a refund." Thomas looked at Emma with curiosity. "What seems to be the issue?" Emma stepped forward with the poise of a child raised in privilege, but possessing genuine sensitivity. "There's nothing wrong with the violin, Mr. Chen. It's actually a beautiful instrument with incredible tone and resonance." Alexander looked confused. "Then why did you tell me you couldn't play it?" Emma looked up at her father with eyes that held both love and disappointment. "Because every time I hold it, I can feel how much someone else loved it. There are tiny wear marks where fingers pressed the strings for years, and the chin rest is shaped by someone who played with real passion." She paused, running her small fingers along the violin's edge. "When I play it, I can hear sadness in the music, like the violin is mourning for someone who's missing. It doesn't feel right to play someone else's dreams when they had to. Give them up." Thomas felt his throat tighten as he watched this young girl articulate something profound about the nature of sacrifice and loss. "That's ridiculous," Alexander said impatiently. "It's just a piece of wood and string. Emma, you're being overly dramatic." "No, Dad," Emma said quietly but firmly. "It's not just wood and string. Someone learned to make music on this violin. Someone's father taught them to play, and they had to sell their memories because they needed money." She looked directly at Thomas. "Mr. Chen, do you know who sold this violin?" Thomas hesitated, unsure whether sharing such information was appropriate, but something in Emma's earnest expression made him decide on honesty. "His name is Roberto Martinez. His father was a mariachi musician, and this violin has been in their family for generations. Roberto learned to play as a child, but he had to sell it to buy school shoes for his daughter." Emma turned to her father with tears in her eyes. "Dad, can we find him and give it back?" Alexander stared at his daughter in amazement. "Emma, we paid good money for that violin. We don't owe this Roberto person anything." "But we owe ourselves something," Emma replied with wisdom that seemed far beyond her 12 years. "We owe it to ourselves to be the kind of people who understand that some things are more valuable than money." Thomas watched this exchange with growing respect for Emma and growing discomfort with Alexander's coldness. Finally, he spoke up. "Mr. Blackwell, if you're serious about returning the violin, Roberto works as a janitor at the Meridian building downtown. He's there most weekday evenings." Alexander looked between his daughter's determined face and Thomas's hopeful expression, clearly struggling with a decision that challenged his worldview. "This is absurd," he muttered, but even as he said it, Thomas could see something shifting in his expression. The next evening, Alexander found himself doing something he had never done before, taking the service elevator to the janitorial offices of the Meridian building. Emma insisted on coming with him, carrying the violin case with the reverence of someone transporting something sacred. Roberto was emptying trash cans on the 32nd floor when Alexander and Emma found him. The surprise on Roberto's face when he saw them was quickly replaced by concern. "Mr. Blackwell, is everything all right? Did something happen with the building maintenance?" Alexander realized that Roberto recognized him as the CEO of one of the building's major tenants, which made this encounter even more complex. "Actually," Alexander said, his usual confidence faltering, "we're here about something personal." Emma stepped forward, holding out the violin case. "Mr. Martinez, my father bought this violin for me, but I can't keep it. It belongs with someone who understands its music." Roberto stared at the case, recognition and longing warring in his expression. "I don't understand. Did something happen to the violin?" "Nothing happened to the violin," Emma said gently. "But something happened to me when I tried to play it. I could feel how much you must miss it, and how much music it still has to share with your family." Alexander watched as his daughter opened the case and revealed the instrument Roberto had been forced to sell. The man's eyes filled with tears as he looked at the violin that had connected him to his father and his heritage. "I can't take this back," Roberto said quietly. "I don't have the money to repay you and I still can't afford to keep it." "You're not taking it back," Alexander heard himself say, surprising everyone, including himself. "We're returning something that never should have left your family in the first place." Emma looked at her father with pride and love that he had rarely seen in her eyes before. "But more than that," Alexander continued, feeling something fundamental shifting in his understanding of what mattered. "I'd like to offer you a position in our corporate facilities management department. It pays better than janitorial work, includes full family benefits, and would give you more time to spend with your daughter and your music." Roberto stared at him in amazement. "Mr. Blackwell, I don't understand why you would do this." Alexander looked at Emma, then back at Roberto. "Because my daughter just taught me that the measure of success isn't what you can afford to buy, but what you choose to give back. And because someone who would sacrifice their most precious possession for their child's welfare is exactly the kind of person I want working with my company." 6 months later, Emma and Roberto's daughter Isabella were performing a duet at the school's multicultural festival. Roberto had been teaching Emma to play traditional Mexican folk songs on a new violin her father had purchased, while Isabella accompanied her on the family violin that had been restored to its rightful home. Alexander sat in the audience beside Roberto's wife, Maria, watching their daughters create music, together and understanding for the first time that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts but in the connections we build and the lives we touch. The violin that had once been a symbol of painful sacrifice had become a bridge between two families, a reminder that compassion and understanding could create harmony more beautiful than any solo performance. Roberto had thrived in his new position, bringing the same dedication and integrity to corporate facilities management that he had shown in his janitorial work. More importantly, he had resumed playing music, filling his home with the melodies his father had taught him and passing them on to Isabella and Emma. Thomas still ran his pawn shop, but now he also had a partnership with Blackwell Industries to identify and help employees who might be facing temporary financial difficulties, creating a program that allowed people to get help without sacrificing their most precious possessions. The violin continued to sing with the voice Roberto's father had given it, but now it sang songs of redemption, connection, and the understanding that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones we choose to share rather than the ones we insist on keeping to ourselves. If this story reminded you that true wealth comes from our ability to recognize and respond to others' humanity, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need this message about the power of compassion and understanding. Subscribe for more stories about how opening our hearts to others often opens doors to our own growth and fulfillment. And please comment below about a time when someone's kindness taught you something important about what really matters, or when you discovered that giving something away brought you more joy than keeping it. Your story might inspire someone else to choose generosity and understanding today.